Hello everyone, and welcome to another spicy podcast. I'm joined today by my co-host Omar.
Hello everybody.
So today guys, we've been preparing some really nice stuff for you. It's called a 6-part podcast. We'll be covering the Middle East from, well, head to toe apparently. But today we'll be talking about the overall events in the Middle East, gonna give you a nice context. Well, there's much to talk about, so don't worry about it. We'll guide you by the hand or something. We have another... On the other episodes prepared, we have Arab nationalism coming next. Arab nationalism and the other Arab ideologies that have shaped the Arab world. It's going to be fun. Thirdly, we'll be talking about radical Islam, how it came to be and how it became this ideology we have grown so fond of. Fourthly, we'll be talking about security plus, as we call it. We'll be talking about mainly of the conflicts in the Middle East. How did they come to be, and what are the repercussions to the region? Then this one is going to be fun as well. The 5th episode will be about economics in the Middle East. It's more like a civilian-friendly, family-friendly episode. We'll be covering about how the Middle East have been developing economically and what might be the prospects for it in this sphere, at least, because we've been talking so much about war and destruction. Let's talk about the development and the construction in a way. And for last, we'll be covering Islamic and Arabic history. It's in a sense it's a larger episode in a timeline perspective. We'll be covering about quite some 2,000 years almost. So stay up. This is going to be a very nice series. Without further ado, if Omar would like to give a word about our sponsor today.
Yeah, so our sponsor today is the Golden Dawn in Greece. They heard our last episode. Being supported by the Ottomans, and they just were having none of it. So they contacted us and they told us that they're going to help us drive out the Ottoman influence from our podcast. So Thank you, Golden Dawn. Thank you. What was the name? Monopolis Paloupoli. I think that's a good Greek name. Right, they all have like Paloupoli and shit like that in their names, so I'm sorry if I offended any Greek people.
We would further like to state that Macedonia is Greece, the region, because you have this made-up country, and they should join Bulgaria. That's all our sponsors told us to say. So
yeah, so also to add to that, Albania is also Greece, Bulgaria is Greece, actually Serbia is Greece as well. I
think the whole Mediterranean is like a rightful Greek land. So
I think the whole world is Greece. So
you're right actually,
including the greater universe. So Pluto is Greece, Uranus is Greece.
So it's not a debt. Greece actually, people should be in debt to Greece for spreading civilization. So
we'll see how long we can go with this until someone spams us with dislikes.
Okay, never mind. I mean, sorry if there were any Macedonians watching and shit. But, okay, let's start with the podcast proper.
So the podcast, this episode has nothing to do with Greece actually. So we're talking about current affairs in the Middle East, particularly, I guess you could say, the atmosphere. And the atmosphere is great in the Middle East. No wars, no conflict. Everyone's happy.
Always sunny in the Middle East.
Always sunny. Always Sunni in the Middle East.
Always sunny.
What would you say the biggest conflict is right now? In my opinion, it's Syria, because it's like the proxy war of the decade. But obviously there's always other conflicts going on. But what would you say is the biggest one right now?
Oh, well, for sure, Syria has been taking the spotlights for such a long time, and, with very, very good reasons to be so, because of the sheer number of people dying. As of today, we have 500,000 people dead in Syria, and, further 10 million displaced. If I'm not mistaken, 12 million displaced right now. We're reaching new records, and out of that, 6 is just outside of the country, so...
I think what's so peculiar about Syria is that it's a microcosm of everything wrong that's happening in the Middle East. You have sectarian divide,
yes,
right? You have
that's a very good point, actually.
Yeah, you have you have the authoritarian aspect of 2003 Iraq. You have, by that I mean with the global powers trying to portray this guy as an evil dictator. You have Daesh, ISIS, operating in Syria as well, which is a more modern problem, right? So you have this whole era of problems in the Middle East collapsed upon itself into Syria, You have problems spanning from the 2003 rhetoric all the way to like 2011 rhetoric. And on top of that, you have proxy wars. You're seeing something like the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and America providing armaments to the Taliban, but the modern version of that, which is Russia, Russia and America and their backed rebel troops. So
Oh,
it's crazy. Like this, I think Syria is going to be studied for some time to come because of just how
like
broad it is. How many different problems there are in that region at this moment.
no, it's no, clearly it's the definition of a clusterfuck. If any day clusterfuck comes to a dictionary, they're just gonna have like Syria as an example. But well, we have Syria, and we're gonna cover more in depth all the repercussions that the Syrian conflict has brought to the entire world in a way. But let's keep it short because otherwise, just gonna. Ooh, you have no idea how big this wasp is. It's like a wasp in my room. Jesus. Anyway, we have a lot of land to cover still. So next, I'd very much like to talk about Lebanon right now because it's I don't know how they're taking it. To be quite honest, Lebanon, as some of you might know, has been in some 20 years of civil war before. It started in the 70s because they had quite an influx of Palestinian refugees that went there. Well, after the shitloads of wars that happened in Palestine, in Israel, we just say occupied Palestine because we don't recognize Israel. Oh no, we do because of Mossad now.
Yeah, that's true.
Never mind. Okay, between Israeli and the Israeli-Palestinian, a fancier word for shit, incompatibilities. That's a good one. Anyway. And then we had all these Palestinians that went to Lebanon and that they wanted to, keeping the story short, they really wanted to shake things up and have a government that would be pro the restitution of Palestine. So that didn't end up well. It triggered a lot of sectarian pressures, and in the end, you had a huge civil war. All against that all-out civil war in Lebanon. Lasted 20 years. They had a further 10 years of Syrian occupation. It was a mess. And, well, Lebanon is surprisingly resilient to the refugee crisis Syria has brought to the country. It took about 200,000 Palestinians to shake the country, and today we have over 2 million Syrians added to Palestinian refugees and all the imbalances the country has. It's quite a lot of damage Lebanon has been taking, and it's still taking it, and it's surviving. So that's the surprising part, I'll say, about how things are going on in Lebanon today. And maybe it's a time bomb, we never know, but just a heads up on Lebanon.
Lebanon is one of those countries where they have such a weird, because their political system in itself is unique in the Arab world, because they have it like perfectly split between 3 different religious groups.
Well, they have 18 sects, but indeed, you can say it's split quite proportionately between the Shia Christians and the Sunni.
Yeah, and they try to like incorporate it so that the prime minister is always going to be like one religious denomination, and then the president's always going to be a different religious denomination, and some weird system like that. But yeah, they after the Civil War, I think they've kind of balanced out in regards to stability. They obviously like had such huge instability that it caused dysphoria in the U.S. and other Western countries. I don't know why Lebanese people like to, because they're like the original Syrian refugee crisis, but they didn't really have much controversy regarding their departure from Lebanon.
I understand perfectly, and maybe we should expand on that next on when we talk about Arab politics, because boy, Lebanon has this consociational system. It's a weird word. You gotta look it up because anyway, the idea is that every sect has a representative, has a proportional representation in its government. And well, when you pour in 2 million Syrians, and most of them being Sunni, it's well, it's not gonna end well in any way.
So I have some weird anecdotal like experiences with Lebanon through my parents. It's not my experience, but I guess it's my parents' experience. So When they were living in Iraq in the 70s or in the 60s, they would travel to Lebanon frequently, just for vacation, I guess, because it was a really nice vacation spot. And whenever they traveled, they'd always be hassled because their names are Sunni, and at the time they only wanted Shia to travel into Lebanon because they're trying to do like some kind of demographic shift through the Syrian government. So they would not allow people to travel into Lebanon if they had a Sunni name, you know. And the only reason that my parents would end up traveling there, or my father would end up traveling, is because his first name is Bashar, and that was seen as like, you know, a good name in Syria, so they would allow him to go through. But yeah, just random anecdotal experiences. So I guess the bigger picture of this is that in Lebanon and Syria, we see this influence of Shia, and what the Iranian government is trying to do is kind of build this corridor from Iran into Lebanon, right?
The famous Shia Crescent.
Yeah, the Shia Crescent. And that's pretty much been the biggest part of regional politics in the Middle East, you know. And we were talking about this earlier before the show, and Tarek brought up a really good point that a lot of Arabs are finding themselves more inclined to listen to the Iranian government because when they look at the Iranian people, they relate more to them. Everything from the rhetoric, you know, wanting to take over Al-Quds, Jerusalem, the way that the Iranian people live, you know, their GDP per capita, everything is more relatable to the people in the Levant than, let's say, like Saudi Arabia, which is trying to push their Wahhabism in the region. Yes. They look at the Saudi people eating their Big Mac for the 12th time in the day, all fat, and you know, driving their Lamborghinis, like leaving them in the desert, and they're like, we don't relate to these people, and they don't care about us. But when they look at the Iranians,
they're not in the struggle, you know.
Yeah, they relate with the Iranian people and their struggle versus the rich Khalijis in Saudi Arabia and Dubai that are fucking LARPing as Anglos going to, you know, English horse races.
yeah. No, but it makes full sense. I mean, some would even argue, oh, why don't these people want to be like the Khaliji? But in many ways, they know they will never be, and that they just think, okay, why would we want to be like a Khaliji who eats 12 mikvahs a day and lives comfortably with his Filipino maid or something? And we have the Iranians who live just like us, you know, in our little villages in the mountains, and well. Of course, they're going to relate more.
Just to add a little bit of context to that, the Khalijis, all the rich Arabs that you see on TV, that's a really modern prospect. They just recently discovered oil in that region. Before that, the people with the real culture were considered the people in the Levant, like, and the people in the Mashriq in general, like Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. All these countries were considered the places of actual culture and history. They've had so many cultures, you know, live and die in that region, and it's influenced the people. Whereas you look at the Khalijis, and they've always just been considered like nomads, Bedouins. They live in tents and ride their camels and shit like that. So that's played a huge cultural factor in the mindset of the Mashriqi people. And that's why they don't really relate too much to the Saudis. They look at them and say, okay, how the hell did these retards get all this oil money, and now they're acting like they're you know, tough stuff, when, you know, like 50 to 80 years ago they were considered nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard to see the photographs, you know, the Dubai in the 70s. It's a very famous photograph, Dubai in the 70s, which is like basically three buildings.
Yeah.
and that was it. So indeed, and perhaps we could argue that they never really had the institutions nor the I want to say capabilities, but indeed not social capabilities of really being this rich if they tried. They just did it because, well, there's literally money pouring out of the sand. So
yeah,
it's obviously we'll cover that further on in our next podcast. But indeed, the Khaliji factor has been playing quite a lot in Arab politics in the past 30 years, especially now with, well, since the time bomb has gone off. But I would like to say another honorable mention, which is Jordan. The situation in Jordan is quite similar to Lebanon because, well, Jordan has been like the refugee camp of the Arab world for
yeah.
half a century now, basically. They've been receiving refugees from Palestine, from Iraq, now from Syria. So Jordan has always been
A lot of people argue that Jordan is kind of like a time bomb because The
Oh yeah.
market in Jordan in terms of like housing is so expensive now because of all the refugees that have come in,
Yeah, also in Lebanon in a
and
sense.
a lot of Iraqis with money. That's like the first place they went was Jordan. A lot of my family went to Jordan from Iraq to escape the problems, and they're all pretty wealthy, and they were able to buy a house. But you imagine some young Jordanian wants to go buy a house, and then he goes and sees all these fuckers. They bought all our houses.
They took our houses.
They took our jobs at our
They
houses.
took our
Uh,
jobs.
but yeah, so I don't know. Do you want to discuss if you think that something is going to happen in Jordan? Because there have been some protests recently regarding taxes. I don't know the specifics, but yeah, there are people marching in the streets at the moment, protesting.
It's
And
your average Arab day, so
yeah,
it's not.
yeah, I guess
uh,
unless it's like car bombs going off, it's considered peaceful, right?
oh yeah, I mean, it's not a good day if you don't have a car bomb, right? You don't have a car bomb to talk about during dinner, you know. So,
Yeah, but
but
oh, go ahead.
no, I just wanted to say that Jordan is kind of the centrist place in the Middle East where you have, well, basically everything happening as well, but they're trying to balance it off. It's I'd say that so far Jordan has been holding up quite a lot. People say they're cucks. I would disagree because they find themselves in such a, I don't know, treacherous context and such a harsh spot in the Middle East that they kind of have to play their cards really, really well. So,
Yeah, Jordan has been pretty prosperous throughout everything, and they haven't sold out their identity. Like, obviously, they have these negative connotations when speaking to other, especially like Palestinians or Lebanese people, but
yeah,
they've maintained their non-Khaliji identity while also being pretty secularist in general. Although the population is pretty religious. I mean, in general, like you go, I mean, a lot of Westerners go there, and you go there and you see not every woman is going to be, covered with a burqa or niqab or something like that. So yeah, I
uh,
guess that's like the last place in the Mashriq that's not enveloped by war and is pretty successful. But
yeah.
but moving on from that, I wanted to go back to the Shia and Sunni. Um, Another big reason that the Shia are kind of taking over, I guess you can say, more successfully than the Khaliji and the Sunni Wahhabism is that they are more successful militarily. Like they are better at strategic planning than the Saudis, and you can see that in Yemen right now. Like they're arming
Oh
these
yeah.
these basically ragtag soldiers, and they're beating, they're eternally beating the Saudis right now with all their Western military equipment, their Abrams and their F-16s, and they're getting beat out by shoeless Houthis.
We like chew caught all day and shit.
Yeah. And
Uh,
that so that's kind of just a testament to how much more foresight the Iranians have. Although they're not, there's people complaining that there might be some problems in terms of like a civil war because they're not spending as much money on their people than they are on like global expenditures on fighting Saudis and putting soldiers in Syria. I
yes.
think that this is going to pay dividends later on when they have this great corridor that they've planned out for the past 10 years and everything's working in their favor.
It's a sort of investment in a way. So we could argue that it might pay its dividends in the future. But perhaps we should talk a little bit about Yemen because you asked what's the worst conflict in the Middle East now. And one could argue it's Yemen, at least as of today. It might not be the deadliest in numbers so far, but indeed, I think Yemen is worse than Syria right now because it's so hopeless. Syria is getting out of it. You can argue that indeed the conflict today is, or in a sense, security there today is in much better shape than it was 3 or 4 years ago. While in Yemen, things have only deteriorated. And while Syria had this very, very important plan of becoming very self-sustainable in terms of agriculture and food security. Indeed, Syrians there were no starvations, at least in mass, in Syria throughout the conflict. There were some in ISIS-held territories, but we couldn't really say it was like a famine and people dying by the thousands because of famine. While in Yemen, that's a different situation. Yemen has been facing severe famine, severe food lack of food. If I was mistaken, 70% of the country is malnourished today, or is in critical levels of nourishment. And that's a lot. Imagine 70% of a country just starving.
Yeah, it's like, so in terms of global projection, like PR, if this war has been the worst for Saudi Arabia and basically Western forces because they're contributing to this, it's considered a genocide by most people because of how it's how this is like played forth. It's essentially a genocide because people are starving to death and they're being blockaded and shelled by indiscriminate Saudi weapons. Um, so the so people might look at this and say, okay, well, why are the Iranians the bad guys, right? Because apparently they've been on the good side of all these conflicts. But when the Iranians actually do take like power in a region, they implement really harsh sectarian laws. And you're kind of seeing it in Iraq right now, where you have squads of Shia militia going around, and they're implementing their specific like sectarian leaders that follow like strict theological beliefs and guidelines, like banning alcohol, which is another recent thing that happened in Iraq. So the problem with Yemen is that people are saying, okay, well, just let the Iranians take over because they're the good guys, they're defending them. But once it's actually taken over, it's only going to extrapolate the conflict even more into Saudi Arabia because now they're going to have a permanent regime there that can enact their influence.
It's not so black and white as it seems. Indeed, it's horrible. That's a problem about talking about the Middle East. It's just gonna go into a domino effect with so many other topics. It's just a clusterfuck, as stated earlier.
Yeah, but yeah. But in terms of right now, the global image that Iran has, they're in the positive because they're not the ones that pulled out of the nuclear deal, and the rest of the world sees it as a bad on America. Like it was negative for them to pull out of the deal. At least that's my perspective. Looking at the rest of the world react to this, I don't know if you agree with me. And then defending the people in Yemen that are starving to death right now from an apparent Saudi genocide is another positive on their record. They were retaliating to Israeli missiles. So that's another positive in terms of global outlook. Like people look at it and say, well, they were attacked and they responded. They didn't go out and attack Israel, although in Western media it was portrayed that Iran attacked Israel like without provocation. They just did it. I guess that's another conversation for another time.
But indeed, but I agree with you. And if there's a counterpoint, I'd like to quote our sponsor, Bibi Netanyahu, and saying, okay, Iran is playing the compliant card now because they need some time to recover, some breathing, some time to catch their breath again, and then they'll start the mayhem. But we don't have to agree with this. Then again, Bibi said so.
That's a whole other topic, is Israel.
Yeah, but let's not delay ourselves so much here because we still have some time to talk about the rest of the Middle East. And we have Iraq. Let's address the elephant in the room here.
Yeah.
We have Iraq.
Iraq is pretty much turning into like a Iranian vassal state because, well, first they've had the Dawa party for a long time, which just got defeated by Muqtada al-Sadr, which is this Iranian, basically. Well, he's born in Iraq, but for all intents and purposes, he's basically Iranian. He dresses like an Iranian.
Yeah, you just see him with like the tire head and stuff.
Yeah, he doesn't even speak Arabic that well. He studied most of his life in Iran. Like he's trying to become an Ayatollah. So for all intents and purposes, this guy is Iranian, right? And he just got elected in the recent elections in Iraq, which, I mean, this guy was the leader of the Mahdi militia in Iraq for the longest time, since like 2006. And they've been the prime instigators in sectarian violence in Iraq. They go around and firebomb Sunni houses. Like that's how dedicated they are to sectarianism. And a lot of his rhetoric has been like, oh, I'm going to make Iraq independent from Iran and America and all these other forces. But everyone really knows that this guy's in bed with Iran. He's lived there for like 10 years. He studied there most of his life to become a Shia scholar. It's kind of more of just rhetoric. It's people know the what's behind the veneer, I guess you could say. And that's only going to lead to more sectarian violence. Obviously, ISIS was defeated recently. Well, for all intents and purposes, they've been defeated. The aftermath of that has been Saudi Arabia try to rebuild Mosul. They've developed these plans that we're going to send our scholars to Mosul, we're going to build our mosques there, and also on top of that we're going to rebuild the infrastructure. So we can kind of see what's developing there, is because Iraq is, well, I guess the Iranians are upset about that because they don't want Saudi influence in a Sunni area of their controlled state. What else can I add to that? And then also obviously is the external forces, which is America. They control I mean, I guess you could say like every facet of the government agencies. They have an advisor in every single position there, trying to control and mediate the problems. But obviously, that hasn't been very successful because they were also there when the rise of ISIS happened. I guess you can say the most control in Iraq is in the hands of the Iranians at the moment.
I think it's also important to give an honorable mention to the Kurds, because now it's not so much of a big issue, but a couple of years ago, especially when the Syrian war was at its height, the Kurds have become quite a big topic regarding the Middle East. And well, there are lots of Kurds in Iraq. Lately, if you'd like to expand much more on that, but today you have Erbil, which is the Kurdish capital for all intended purposes, which indeed has been this haven of what some could argue stability in the Middle East, and a lot of Iraqis have fled there, and indeed they try to sell this image of, oh look, we the Kurds are trying to bring back civilization and democracy, and they've been selling out some of these very much progressive ideals into the Middle East, or at least trying to advert, oh look, why are you not supporting us? And I don't know if we should touch upon this right now, but
okay, so I gotta say, the Kurds probably have the best PR campaign in the history of the world.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the Kurdish population in itself, it's not very progressive at all. In terms of, like, let's say, female genital mutilation, they have the highest numbers in all of Iraq. With the Arab population, it's pretty much non-existent. With the Kurdish population, it's very prominent because they're very tribal, and I guess you can say they stick to old traditions. I guess that's the best way to put it. And in terms of their economic success, that happened right after Saddam was toppled because, well, they started selling oil to Israel, right? They were one of the biggest exporters of oil to Israel as soon as they started seizing more and more land. This recently stopped being the case because the Iraqi government seized Kirkuk from the Kurds, and then they halted the oil supply to Israel. So, and on top of that, if you look, it's all public record, by the way, if you want to search it up. The Kurds have a lot of public investors because as soon as I started selling oil to the Israelis, that opened up markets to other corporations that said, "Oh, we got to start sending our people there because they're going to be complicit in whatever we want." They don't have this kind of like anti-Western, anti-Israel stigma that the rest of the population there has. So they have had a lot of investors in recent years, and they've had a good PR campaign to represent themselves as very secular, kind of progressive population in Iraq when it's not really the case,
If we have to talk about that, maybe in Erbil, maybe in Mosul, you might have a more secular Kurds, at least as far as Iraq is concerned, but you just have to drive 20 minutes into the villages, and you start to see that indeed they're not so different from all the other smaller towns you have around here. You have very backwards and still very traditional practices that female mutilation is one of them, arranged marriages and all that.
So another thing is that a lot of Westerners, at least I see like Western news outlets, they don't really know what Kurds are, because when they talk about the population, they'll say Shia, Sunni, and Kurds, like as if they're not religious or something, as if they're like atheists. When they're Sunni, 99.9% of them are Sunni, they're not some weird like Zoroastrians or something. And I don't know if you've seen this, but every single time Kurds have been talked about on Western media, it's always been they're like their own category. They're not Sunni or Shia.
As far as sects go, maybe we could argue that they are a sect in itself, but oh boy, it's a long story, and we're of course going to expand on that later on. But we still have to cover the Khalijis right now. So thoughts and prayers on the Khaliji.
Oh, they're great.
Because this is the best part. I mean, maybe let's define Khaliji. Khalijis are all the Gulf guys, with the exception perhaps of because many people consider Yemen to be a Khaliji country just because it's culturally close to it, but Yemen is not Khaliji at all.
Yeah, so
any other aspect.
So there's difference kind of between cultural and geographical Khaliji.
Yeah, I mean, they are in the peninsula, but no fucking way they are Khaliji.
Yeah, although they do share some linguistic ties to the Saudi dialect and all that, culturally they're totally separate. I mean, we see them, they're like barefoot and They're in no way in the same economic condition as their neighbors are.
If we actually introduce you to the actors, we have the small ones, as we like to call them, Bahrain and Qatar, and Kuwait as well, which are like micronations. Each has about 2 to 3 million people. They're just and pretty much 2/3 of those are just Pakistanis and foreign labor.
Yeah, that's something that we should touch upon, is the amount of foreign labor that there are in these Khalijis countries.
Yeah, we talk about that in the economics, don't worry, because we have a lot to talk about though. But indeed, yeah, we had a discussion about Saudization of labor force, but we'll leave it for just the economics episode. But indeed, then you have Saudi Arabia, which is kind of the elephant in the room here. It's the richest of the Khaliji countries just because of its sheer size. And then we have the United Arab Emirates, which is, I would say, the shiny star. They have Dubai, they have Abu Dhabi. They I would say, I like in a way, the ones that invested their money the best when it comes to oil money. And then you have Oman, which is the best country on this earth. I wish the whole Arab world would be like Oman. They're just there. No, okay, we have our money. Let's just enjoy our big cars and shit. We don't need we don't need to get involved. So I'd say Oman is the role model for the Arab world, even though no one really follows it. So,
well, yeah, I think the biggest issue, the reason that Arab countries are always targeted is because they're so flashy, one way or the other. You either have Saddam trying to annihilate Saudi Arabia, or you have I don't know.
It's always so extreme. I mean, it's not. Oh, we don't like. No, we're gonna annihilate you.
We will bring hellfire onto your countries.
We'll slaughter your man and enslave your women. It's just like that. So, oh wow.
I guess they take. Oh, whatever. I don't want to get into religion, but. Yeah, so
we'll cover that in our Islamic history.
Yeah, we're gonna cover that later, but. So, the Khalijis.
Well, when it comes to them, it's oil. Oil is the key word here. Then again, they were quite they still are very backwards people. Very, they were nomads for pretty much all recorded history. And then you just find money right under your feet. A lot of money.
Yeah.
And I'd say that's their leading. Description, the key word we could use to describe them. They have a lot of money today. These guys are really, really rich. Only Qatar, for instance, has a GDP per capita of $100,000. It's just crazy.
Oh yeah, they have the highest. They have some of the highest GDP per capitas in the whole world, and it's insane. Like the amount of money that is there, and what they've tried to do is kind of consolidate with the other countries by making the Arab League. Although it's called the Arab League, it's more like the Khaliji League.
And friends.
It's the Gulf
League.
They
have the Gulf Cooperation Council, by the way, which is like the cookie, the VIP party of the Arab League.
Yeah.
And just a correction here, because I said being rich in oil. Qatar in itself is not so rich in oil as in petroleum, but in natural gas. And just a shitload of natural gas. It's like 2 Russias or something, like in yearly production of natural gas. So it's a lot of money, man.
And then on top of that, again, we're going to get into this later in the economic episode, but 50% of their population is not even a native. They import all these people to work there. Yeah. And it's said that, again, like these are going to cause some societal stresses or, some kind of like revolt or something, but I don't know. People are too happy. You live there and you're like living the good life. I don't think you have much time to revolt against anything.
Yeah, that's what they call the Khaliji model, which some countries like Brunei and other oil-rich countries have adopted. It's just like you buy the population basically. You create a lot of redundant public offices and stuff like that. You have a shitload of ministries, and you just employ people in them. Usually, like the father of the house, so the man of the house in a way, and then you have a family entirely provided for. You pay them an absurdly high salary. Sometimes it's not unusual to have a $60,000 a year salary just to basically stamp stuff as a public officer.
Yeah.
So.
Now that you bring that up, I'm starting to remember. So in my university, there's a lot of Khalijis that go there, and I was asking them one time about just the policies that they have, and this guy was telling me that if the Saudi king, if he's assassinated, then people don't receive like this monetary pool that is saved for when he passes away. So if he does pass away of natural causes, every single Saudi citizen gets like $10,000 or something. It's like, what the hell? Like, what kind of?
It's the Khaliji model. You just buy the social
Yeah,
cohesion. And don't get us wrong, because there are some sectarian tensions as well in the Khaliji world. For instance, Bahrain, the population, I mean, the citizen population, about 70% of it is Shia. And they had some big protests, especially when the Arab Spring was at its full. You had a lot of protests which are just met with extreme violence, but no one really talks about it in the West, of course. And then, in the meantime, they just pay off whatever problems that might arise.
yeah, and again, this is why the rest of the Arab world kind of looks at these people and hates them,
Yeah.
because it's just their whole like lifestyle is so diametrically opposed to the rest of the Arab world that there's no way you can relate to these people. But they're still trying to exert their influence through Wahhabism. I think they've done it pretty successfully in like the Caucasus. If you look at Chechnya, they have a lot of Wahhabi-built mosques because Kadyrov is very in bed with with the Saudis. He invites them all the time. They come over and bring like a hair follicle of the prophet or something. But I don't know where else they've been successful. They haven't been successful where it matters, which is the conflict zones. And what else? Iran is. They've been trying to cause some problems in the Khaliji world, but nothing's really hit them like close to home. It's more been their proxy wars.
We kind of covered the Middle East. I mean, I know some people might be very much anxious about to hear about Egypt and the Maghreb countries. Libya, Morocco, Algeria. Oh, you have the Lebanon too, which is Tunisia, but we talk about that in another episode.
Well, no. So there are some really big modern conflicts with Lebanon. I'm sorry, not Lebanon, with Libya, which is like it's been seen on the news.
It's all the same thing. Some Phoenicians and shit. So.
Okay. So the biggest thing that you see on Western media right now is that there's a slave trade in Libya, which it's pretty accurate. That's what's happening. After Gaddafi fell, pretty much all social stability collapsed with him, and now there's almost like pseudo anarchy. Although his son, Gaddafi's son, is now running for some office. I think he's running for the presidency in Libya. He's considered he's like the second coming of Christ in a way.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of instability that there is in Libya right now. It's controlled by like 4 factions, and man, we talk about
it's Mad Max. It's Mad Max.
It's not chaos in the same way that Syria is. It's chaos in Mad Max. Like you have these like war tribes kind of fighting each other constantly, and then the civilians are caught in the crossfire, and you have like all these Central African people coming up to try to immigrate, and they end up getting captured and enslaved. So it's this pretty dire situation you have in Libya. Egypt had the overthrow of what's his name?
Is it Morsi? No, not Morsi. Mubarak.
Yeah, Mubarak. Okay, so Mubarak was overthrown in a peaceful way, I guess you can say, quote unquote peaceful. There was like thousands of people protesting.
And then you had Morsi, and then you had Sisi, and then you have the eternal Sisi. Sisi's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and I guess you can say that Egypt is pretty stable, although they have some bad social issues.
Relatively.
They have some pretty bad social issues, primarily in regards to like education. Their education system is destroyed. And they also have some like class issues. There's a really big lower class in Egypt. A lot of poverty. But what else is there to cover, really? I guess the biggest elephant in the room is Israel.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about because we're being paid off not to talk about Israel.
Yeah.
So I'd just like to make a little observation here. Our main focus when we talk about the Middle East is, the Middle East. And by the Middle East, we consider the Mashriq, which is Syria, Iraq, and the northern part of and the Arab Peninsula. That's what usually is considered the Middle East. Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, all those are considered North Africa. So it's more of a heads up. Hey guys, we know you exist, but some would argue it's a bit different over there, even though they share so much in common with the Middle East.
So the reason, okay, yeah. So we could say that they're politically a little bit different because they've been occupied for so long by their
Yeah.
French overlords that they've
Thank you, my master.
they've diverged a bit from the rest of the Middle East in their politics. They're kind of still finding their ground in a way, you could say, whereas the rest of the Middle East has been enveloped in conflict for a lot longer, a different kind of conflict than trying to, secede from their colonial overlords. It's kind of it's two different uh, areas of war and conflict. Nah, but anyways, Israel.
Oh boy.
The
I mean, we're kind of getting too long here. Like, just we're almost beating the 42-minute mark, so let's wrap it up.
Yeah. So you want to finish up with Israel? Um,
We're not supposed to talk about Israel. No, just of course gonna talk about that. So Israel. Oh boy, isn't it? There's Israel, and then they have these dissidents. They're not Palestinians, they're dissidents, right?
oh yeah, totally. No such thing as Palestinians.
Ungrateful dissidents, of course. No, but okay, let's be serious now. The situation in Israel, it's also complicated because of all the international pressure that's been put into Israel in the past years, especially for all the awareness that the Syria has brought to the Middle East. So Israel has been taking its toll as well. Uh, so much so that the United Nations Human Rights Council has been, even though condemning Israel for so long, even the US just said, "Oh, hey guys, we're out of this. Stop picking on our master," or something like that. So.
Well, okay. So just a little bit of contextual history. When the Balfour Declaration was announced, and kind of the Israeli state came to power, they declared their independence later on. There was a war. There have been several wars since, and they've garnered some land through conflict. And then the UN, they agreed on some UN resolution that they're going to go back to their, was it 47, or no, what borders was it? I think it's 47. Whatever. So they were going to go back to the original borders, and they haven't. They've been extending I guess I could kind of say these little colonies, little villages into what they'd consider Palestinian land. There was in 2008 there was a war in Gaza, and then after that war in Gaza, they said that, okay, these people are not occupied anymore, although they are because Israel controls their import and export. They're kind of, I guess you can say, secluded and isolated and imprisoned, in some ways. Although technically they're not occupied anymore, whatever the hell that means. And since then, there's just been constant clashes with the Palestinians and the IDF. And IDF has introduced Israel has introduced some of these kind of draconian press laws recently, where you can't record the IDF and you can't really talk about the IDF, or you get snatched up in the middle of the night. Again, this is a very, very consolidated and skimmed through a lot of the history, because we're going to go into the history later on. But just to get to where we are now, there's a big backlash in the global community in regards to BDS. Israel has a strong lobby in the U.S., so they've introduced a lot of BDS laws so that people can't participate in this in this movement, which is kind of like this boycott movement. And now there's more public outcry because of the recent protests where a lot of Palestinians were killed by IDF forces on the Gaza border. Which again, it's like they say they're protecting their borders, but if it's a border, that implies that it's a separate country, right?
Oh
but
boy.
but at the same time, they're able to enact their will onto the people in Gaza and limit their imports, exports, the people that can leave, the travel. They control everything within Gaza. And then you have the West Bank, which is kind of more compliant, I guess, to the Israelis. That's where a lot of the settlements are, the Israeli settlements. That take place in the West Bank because, again, they're not as hostile. Now, the biggest irony in all of this is that you hear a lot of Israelis talking about Hamas, when Hamas was actually backed by the Israeli government to oppose Arab nationalism. They didn't like this nationalist movement, this secular nationalist movement, and they thought that Hamas would put a dent in it. And now, now that their wishes came true, they use it as their like as that they're the victims of Hamas. When again, none of this is conspiracy. They did publicly support, well, not publicly, but they did support Hamas to come into power.
Only so that they would have like the scapegoat. Oh, look what Hamas is doing.
Well, yeah. Well, at the time, the PLO was considered the more the bigger threat, I guess.
Yeah, no.
Islamism was considered kind of
Right.
like fringe and whatever, and no one really cared about it. And now, because that think about it, at that time that you're talking about Nasser, Gaddafi, Saddam, Assad, these are all like the whole region was secular, and the PLO fell in line with those kind of secular ideologies, and Islamic groups didn't really exist. You had the Muslim Brotherhood, which were getting beat out by Syria and Egypt, and then Israel decided, okay, well, we're going to fund Hamas because they're going to put a dent in these guys, and they're going to be so disorganized, they're not going to be able to attack us. Which I guess it did pay off because
It
Hamas is like,
worked. In the end, it worked.
yeah, because none of these Islamic groups cooperate; they all attack each other.
Yeah. That's one magic thing about the Middle East. Everyone just hates each other.
Yeah, at least there was some very thin-veiled cooperation when they were all like nationalists. No one was attacking each other. Like although Syria and Iraq hated each other when they had Ba'ath governments, they didn't attack each other, right? Whereas you have these like Daesh.
I mean, not directly, at least.
Well, yeah, not directly, but when these Islamic groups like they're so sporadic and unorganized. Like one day they'll have a new target and they might attack each. Like ISIS, Daesh, which is ISIS, is attacking Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda is attacking Mujahideen. Sometimes they cooperate, sometimes they don't. It's like some kind of clusterfuck in the Middle East, as always. But what else? So yeah, so the protests in Gaza, big outcry. A lot of people are kind of saying that Gaza is being used as this experimental area because they unleash all their experimental weapons that they're developing for the IDF on like on the protest, right? So they can determine what's working, what's not working. In the same way that the Iron Dome, which is like the Israeli missile defense system, was given by America, it was given by America primarily for testing, like because there's no missiles coming to the U.S.,
Not
right?
yet.
So they give it to Israel free of charge, and they say, "Hey, test this out for us," and they get all the data, and they keep developing their own. So I don't know what else really to add to
And
this.
I think we're kind
Yeah.
of running out of the time here.
All right. Well, how do you want to wrap this up? Anything you want to add to Israel?
No, of course not. I don't know. There's nothing to add to it, bro.
Tarek is very hesitant to talk about Israel because if he says anything negative, he'll be deported back to Brazilistan.
Shit. It's true.
Whereas
It's true,
I live in
actually.
I live in the land of the free and home of the free and the brave, so I get to talk about whatever I want.
I think
until,
not. I think you're not allowed to talk about Israel there.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the only. I can talk about it a little bit more than you until the Hamas or until Mossad. See, I'm brainwashed. Until Mossad comes and kicks in my door and drags me away to Israel re-education camp.
But anyway, well, this was the first episode. We're kind of reaching the 50-minute mark right now. And although, thank you for staying up. If you stood up all this way, I think the next episodes are going to be more focused. Today we kind of had to talk a little bit about everything, but the next episodes are going to be much more focused, much more in depth. So please don't unsubscribe yet.
Make sure you like and subscribe to help Greater Israel achieve its goals.
Actually, maybe we should start talking about the like and subscribe a bit by the beginning of the video because no one's staying this long. So
Yeah, it's true. So we should have said on the last episode that the Ottomans want to like and subscribe so they can reclaim the Serbians, right? Whatever. We're going off on like random tangents.
Anyway,
Yeah, thank you so much.
thanks for today, guys, and we'll see you next time. If you need anything, if you want to make any feedback, if you want us to cover any particular topic, just leave it in the comments. And
Much love.
much love.